Welcome back to part 2 of observational studies and what the difference between observational studies and experiments are. So here's the vocab because, again, we're starting something new, fairly vocab intensive. The next 2 lessons we're going to kind of go through and get down to the nitty-gritty and math behind it and things like that. All right, so first of all, observational studies. There's no treatments imposed like we talked about, and we only observe, hence the term observational studies. I know, I'm stunned as well. Experiments, there is a treatment imposed, and then it allows for the causation. This one, you can't do anything for cause. Okay, you can't say, hey, this is what's going on. We can say, this is what we're seeing. So, for example, right now with the coronavirus, they're finding that people of type O blood type are having lower incidence of complications when they get COVID. So the question is there something they're causing that or not? So they have to obviously go through and make sure that they're taking care of all those things. And, you know, sometimes there's no way around it because you can't just give a whole bunch of people COVID and see what happens. I suppose you could. You're kind of doing that maybe with some of the vaccine stuff, but it doesn't matter. We're getting ahead of ourselves. So observational studies, you're just watching and making a conclusion about it. Experiments, you are doing something to your subjects or experimental units, and then that will allow you to say what's going on. Now up here, explanatory variables. They're used to predict what's going on, like we talked about. So is taking the SAT course causing SAT scores to rise? Now, if there's more than one explanatory variable of what's going on, then those are each called factors. And that's kind of what those confounding factors do. And then the factors all have levels because, again, for example, if they're taking the SAT course, the question is the course, you know, once a week just for review? Is it a in-depth, this is how you go through, these are the test-taking strategies you can, you know, use to gain a couple of points, that type of thing. And you can actually, in an experiment, break things up into, have those different levels where you can go through and say, all right, we're going to control for this. Here's the first group where nothing's happening. Here's the second group where this is happening, the third group. But I'm getting ahead of myself. It's just so much fun. Okay, response variable are the outcomes. That's pretty self-explanatory, so that's what we look for, what we're measuring. Treatment, what is done to your participants? It sounds awful, and I will be perfectly upfront with that. So this is one of those things where we use jargon that may sound to people outside of statistics maybe a little bit. So yes, we're doing a treatment on them. Ooh, what's the treatment? We're putting them in an SAT course. Okay. Experimental units are who or what the treatment is imposed upon. So it's kind of like you remember how there's the population and the subjects in terms of, you know, who are we studying here? Then this is going off and say, well, again, we're taking experimental units from that, and that also indicates that we're doing an experiment and not just an observational study. And then there's these confounding variables, and this is how this works. You have A, and you're looking for B, all right? Confounding variable is down here where it's affecting both what's going on in A and what's going on in B. And since it's kind of outside of this relationship here, you don't necessarily know what's going on or know that it's happening. And there's ways that we can control for it, and that's what we're going to talk about the rest of this chapter. But that's what that is, and so you have to be very, very careful about that. Okay, and that's the one thing Rod Blagojevich in my previous video didn't understand. So the variables are not, these are specifically variables that are not controlled that affect the results. Okay, so again, I mean, you could even do that. Socioeconomic background, you know, did their parents go to college? That would probably have some impact in terms of whether or not they're taking the SAT course, that type of thing. All right, so you've got a problem down here, 2 problems actually here, where you're going to kind of say, is it an experiment or is it a observational study? Hit pause, we'll go through it here in a second, and then you're done. So for this one, you're basically asking if you leave the brightness down, or, you know, does the screen brightness affect battery usage on a laptop? And so what they did is these researchers bought 30 new laptops, chose 15 of them at random, and put the screens to the brightest setting. The other 15 screens were left in the default setting, moderate brightness. And then they measured how long each machine's battery lasted. Was this an observational study or an experiment? It is an experiment because they did a treatment, and it was imposed on the laptops. Excuse me. And the treatment happened to be the screen brightness. So again, if you're asked this question, yes, it was an experiment, say what the treatment was, okay? Questions 2 to 4, ABC News article, teenagers who eat with their families at least 5 times a week are more likely to get better grades in school. Woo! Okay. Sample survey conducted by researchers at Columbia. So again, this is from a survey. Surveys tend to be what? Observational studies. Why? Because you're just getting information and you're looking through it. The other end is an observational study because the students weren't assigned to eat with their families. If you wanted this to be an experiment, you would take 100 students and you say, you need to eat with your families 5 times a week and you guys need to not eat with your family 5 times a week. And they didn't do any of that. Explanatory variable, whether or not the teens ate with their family at least 5 times a week. And the response is simply their grades. Again, and that's really nicely spelled out up here. And then clearly explain why a study can't establish a cause and effect relationship. Suggests a variable that might be confounding things. We can't say there's cause and effect because teens who eat with their families may have something in common that affects their grades. Maybe teens who all eat together have healthy diets. Maybe teens who eat with their families, there's more of a routine, and so they have a standard bedtime. Maybe there's teens who tend to eat with their families. There's 2 parents, and maybe not everybody has 2 parents at home. I mean, there's all sorts of different things that you could work through there, and so that's part of the many reasons why you can't do cause and effect. And a good survey should be able to winnow some of that down, or some of those down. But again, if you really want to get down to it, and we'll talk about specifics here coming up, it's that you need to do experiments to have that cause and effect relationship. All right, that's my time. Hope that helps. If you have any questions, comment below. I know you're here only for class. It's fine. Talk to you later.